In a significant shift in trade policy, President Donald Trump has announced plans to exempt American car manufacturers from some of the most burdensome tariffs currently levied on imported goods. This decision, which follows extensive lobbying from the automotive sector, represents a notable climb-down in Trump's ongoing trade war, particularly against China. The exemptions will specifically apply to car parts affected by tariffs imposed in response to China's alleged role in the fentanyl crisis, as well as those tariffs associated with steel and aluminum imports. Despite the relief for carmakers, the administration will maintain a hefty 25% tariff on foreign-made vehicles, along with an additional 25% levy on auto parts set to take effect on May 3. This partial relief underscores the pressures faced by the automotive industry, as executives have increasingly voiced concerns over the detrimental effects of tariffs on car prices, supply chains, and employment levels. John Elkann, chairman of Stellantis, warned that American and European car industries are being put at risk by the administration's aggressive trade policies. The decision to grant these exemptions appears to be a response to escalating criticism from the auto sector, which has urged the White House to reconsider its approach to tariffs that threaten the industry's viability. One senior automotive executive emphasized the need for the administration to avoid imposing additional tariffs, stating, "Don't hit us over and over with all of these other tariffs, because that really jeopardizes the health of our sector." This concession follows a broader trend in which Trump has begun to offer carve-outs for favored industries amidst growing concerns that his tariff policies could trigger a recession. Following the initial announcement of reciprocal tariffs of up to 50% on almost all U.S. trading partners, later scaled back to a 10% baseline, Trump has sought to mitigate backlash from various sectors. Last week, the administration exempted consumer electronics, including laptops and smartphones, from reciprocal tariffs, although it hinted at potential new levies later in the year. The automotive sector's reprieve marks a critical juncture for Trump, who has previously adopted a hardline stance on trade. The White House has not commented on this latest development, but it reflects an ongoing reassessment of tariffs as their impact on the economy becomes increasingly evident. The administration's previous tariffs, initially framed as measures to counter unfair trade practices, have inadvertently contributed to volatility in global markets and rising fears of economic downturn. As Trump navigates this complex landscape, he is simultaneously facing tensions in U.S.-China relations, particularly regarding trade negotiations. While Trump has claimed that the U.S. is actively engaging with China to resolve tariff disputes, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson has countered that no such negotiations are occurring, further complicating the relationship between the two economic giants. This discord is emblematic of the broader challenges facing the administration as it attempts to balance domestic industry needs with international trade dynamics. Looking ahead, the automotive industry's response to these tariff adjustments will be closely monitored, as will the broader implications for U.S.-China trade relations. With the upcoming deadline for new auto parts tariffs looming, the next steps taken by both the Trump administration and the automotive sector will likely set the tone for future trade policies and their impact on the American economy. As the landscape continues to evolve, industry leaders and policymakers alike will be watching closely to see if this latest move signifies a shift toward more flexible trade practices or merely a temporary reprieve in a contentious trade war. In a dramatic escalation of tensions, former President Donald Trump has publicly criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy for rejecting a proposed peace deal that would see Ukraine acknowledge Russia's annexation of Crimea. This conflict comes at a critical juncture, as both nations seek to negotiate an end to the ongoing war while grappling with the complexities of international diplomacy. On April 23, Trump took to his Truth Social platform to express his frustration, citing Zelenskyy's firm stance that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea as detrimental to peace efforts. Inflammatory statements like that are harmful for peace negotiations with Russia and will just prolong the killing field, Trump stated, underscoring his belief that acceptance of the annexation was essential for moving forward. This rhetoric reflects the former president's ongoing push for a swift resolution to the conflict, which he believes hinges on Ukraine making significant concessions. The situation has been further complicated by the U.S. administration's handling of diplomatic initiatives. Vice President J.D. Vance during a visit to India remarked that the U.S. had presented a very explicit proposal to both parties, urging them to either agree or risk the U.S. withdrawing from the negotiation process altogether. This proposal reportedly includes a freeze on current territorial lines, implying that both Ukraine and Russia would have to relinquish some control over regions they currently hold. However, the dynamics of the negotiations are fraught with challenges. Zelenskyy has consistently opposed any agreement that would require Ukraine to concede territory, emphasizing that such a decision would be unconstitutional. "There's nothing to talk about here," he reiterated during a media conference illustrating the deep-rooted complexities that underlie the ongoing conflict. As the U.S. engages in discussions with European allies and Ukrainian officials in London, the absence of key figures such as Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff from the negotiations raises questions about the commitment of the Trump administration to a comprehensive diplomatic solution. Analysts have suggested that the U.S. may not be fully invested in long-term negotiations, with some viewing this as a potential pivot toward favoring Russian interests over Ukraine's, contrary to the collective stance of European nations that continue to support Ukraine militarily and economically. The backdrop of increased violence only heightens the urgency of the situation. On April 22, a Russian drone strike in Kharkiv resulted in civilian casualties, further demonstrating the dire circumstances faced by those in conflict zones. Trump's comments come amid ongoing hostilities, with reports indicating that Russian missile strikes in Kyiv have led to considerable loss of life and injuries, compounding the already dire humanitarian crisis. As Ukraine remains steadfast in its refusal to concede Crimea, the potential for a diplomatic resolution hangs precariously in the balance. The Kremlin has set forth its own demands for peace, including the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian military forces from territories claimed by Russia, the lifting of international sanctions, and assurances against Ukraine's NATO membership. The hardline stance from both sides highlights the significant obstacles to peace, with experts indicating that any agreement that compromises Ukrainian territorial integrity would encounter strong domestic opposition. Looking ahead, the future of peace talks remains uncertain, with the Trump administration signaling potential disengagement from negotiations. The call for a ceasefire and resolution to hostilities becomes increasingly critical. The ongoing dialogue among U.S. Ukrainian and European officials may yet yield a breakthrough, but as it stands, the path to peace is riddled with complexities and the specter of continued conflict looms large. As both sides navigate this treacherous diplomatic landscape, the hope for a sustainable resolution will depend on a willingness to compromise and the ability to address the deep-seated grievances that have fueled this prolonged war. As President Donald Trump approaches his 100th day in office, a recent Pew Research Center report reveals a notable shift in public sentiment regarding his administration. The findings indicate a significant drop in Trump's job approval ratings, with many key policies facing widespread disapproval. This decline comes amid a tumultuous period characterized by market fluctuations, contentious executive orders, and a vocal opposition from various states and political factions. On April 23, 2025, the Pew Research Center reported that Trump's job approval has dipped below 40%. A stark contrast to the enthusiasm that marked the early days of his presidency. This decline can be attributed to a series of contentious policies and decisions that have polarized public opinion. Notably, Trump's hardline stance on immigration, trade tariffs, and education reforms has drawn criticism from both sides of the political aisle. The administration's approach to governance appears increasingly disconnected from the concerns of average Americans, noted a Pew analyst. Market reactions have also mirrored this growing discontent. On the same day, U.S. stock markets experienced a rally, with the S&P 500 rising by 1.4% and the Nasdaq Composite climbing 2.2%. Analysts suggest that this boost was fueled by Trump's apparent softening of his earlier criticisms of the Federal Reserve and a more conciliatory approach to his trade policies. Investors are cautiously optimistic that the administration's tone is shifting towards stability, which could lead to more predictable economic conditions, remarked one financial expert. However, the atmosphere remains charged with controversy. The Trump administration is currently facing a lawsuit from 12 states challenging its tariff policies, which the plaintiffs argue are unconstitutional and detrimental to the economy. This legal action highlights a growing concern that Trump's unilateral approach to trade could undermine established governmental processes. The tariff policies seem to be driven more by personal whims than by lawful authority, stated Oregon's Attorney General, who is part of the lawsuit. In terms of domestic policy, Trump's recent executive orders have sparked significant debate. Among these is a directive aimed at revising school discipline guidelines, which the administration claims have unfairly targeted disciplinary actions based on equity and inclusion principles. Critics argue that this approach could lead to an increase in discriminatory practices within schools. Education Secretary Linda McMahon emphasized the need for common-sense school discipline policies, but opponents fear that this move could undermine efforts to create fair educational environments. Moreover, Trump's administration has not shied away from addressing cultural issues, as seen in his remarks regarding the names of sports teams associated with Native American imagery. While he criticized recent name changes as degrading, he acknowledged that the Washington NFL team's name change might warrant a different discussion, reflecting the complexities of cultural representation in sports. As Trump prepares for a visit to Michigan on April 29 to mark his 100th day, the political landscape continues to evolve. The visit is expected to draw attention to his administration's efforts to maintain military bases, a topic of local concern. Additionally, Trump's meeting with foreign leaders at the upcoming funeral of Pope Francis may also serve to bolster his international standing amidst ongoing criticisms of his foreign policy. Looking ahead, the trajectory of Trump's presidency appears uncertain. The intertwining of economic policy, public sentiment, and domestic controversies will likely shape the narrative of his administration in the coming months. As the nation grapples with these challenges, the implications for Trump's future policies and political capital remain to be seen. The evolving landscape suggests that the administration will need to navigate a delicate balance between asserting its agenda and addressing the growing demands of an increasingly vocal electorate. As the Biden administration approaches its 100-day milestone, a recent Pew Research Center survey reveals a significant decline in public approval for President Trump's handling of key policies, particularly the economy. With mounting discontent, Trump's job ratings have dipped, underscoring a growing sense of unease among the American populace regarding his economic strategies. The survey indicates that only 39% of Americans approve of Trump's economic performance, a stark contrast to the 63% approval he enjoyed shortly after his inauguration. This drop in approval is accompanied by widespread disapproval of Trump's tariffs, which have been particularly impactful in Europe. Germany's economic outlook has taken a hit due to Trump's imposition of a 25% tariff on imported automobile steel and aluminum. The German government recently revised its growth forecast for 2025 to 0, down from an earlier projection of 0.3%. The German economy, which is already suffering from weak foreign demand and reduced competitiveness, is particularly affected by the U.S. trade policy, stated Robert Habeck, Germany's economy minister. The tariffs have not only stifled Germany's export-driven economy but have also led to an environment of uncertainty, causing many companies to rethink their growth strategies. Helena Melnikov, managing director of the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, warned that without swift countermeasures from the new German government, the country may face a third consecutive year of recession. The International Monetary Fund has echoed these concerns, predicting no growth for Germany in 2025, a stark reflection of the turmoil caused by U.S. trade policies. Meanwhile, in the United States, a Reuters Ipsos poll highlights that Americans are increasingly dissatisfied with Trump's economic management. The poll reveals that nearly 58% of respondents believe the economy is not performing well. A sentiment that could have far-reaching implications as the nation gears up for the next election cycle. Analysts argue that public perception is crucial. If dissatisfaction continues to grow, it may jeopardize Trump's chances for re-election. In light of these developments, the future of the U.S. economy under Trump remains uncertain. With tariffs and trade wars looming large, the administration's ability to navigate these challenges will be critical. Observers note that the chaotic nature of Trump's economic strategies may have already inflicted considerable damage, with some experts suggesting that it might be too late to rectify the course. As the administration enters this pivotal phase, the focus will undoubtedly shift to how it addresses public concerns and economic challenges. The upcoming months will be crucial in determining whether Trump can regain the trust of the American people and stabilize both domestic and international economic relations. The interplay between domestic policy and international trade will remain a key theme, with the potential for significant ramifications for both the U.S. and the global economy. In a landscape where technology and military operations increasingly intersect, recent developments within the U.S. Department of Defense (DoD) are drawing attention not just for their implications on defense spending but also for the leadership style of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Amidst a backdrop of reform and modernization, Hegseth's approach is both ambitious and controversial, particularly as it intersects with the growing reliance on technology like messaging apps for communication. This week, the Pentagon initiated a comprehensive review of its 72 active major defense acquisition programs, a move prompted by President Donald Trump's executive order aimed at overhauling government procurement processes. Hegseth emphasized the necessity for high-performing mission-aligned programs at every level during a speech at the U.S. Army War College. He expressed a commitment to advancing military capabilities, notably referencing the ambitious Golden Dome missile defense initiative and the newly launched F-47 fighter jet, which he touted as a groundbreaking advancement in aerial warfare technology. However, Hegseth's reforms are not without their challenges. The Secretary faces scrutiny following reports that he utilized the non-governmental messaging app Signal to share sensitive information regarding military operations. Critics argue that such practices could jeopardize national security, raising questions about the boundaries between modern communication tools and responsible governance. Hegseth's remarks, which included a rejection of what he termed woke policies, further polarized opinions on his leadership and the administration's direction. In tandem with these developments, the DoD announced significant cost-saving measures, identifying $5.1 billion in potential savings by curtailing contracts deemed unnecessary. This effort is part of a broader strategy to enhance efficiency within the department, a goal underscored by Hegseth's call for a streamlined acquisition process that prioritizes speed and effectiveness. "We have to be able to get what we need and when we need it," he stated, pointing to a shift towards a software acquisition pathway as a preferred model. As the DoD pushes forward with its reforms, the implications for defense technology investment cannot be overlooked. Venture capitalists are increasingly pouring billions into defense tech, driven by the administration's focus on innovation. Yet, there are concerns that the enthusiasm surrounding these investments may outpace the actual capabilities and readiness of the technologies being developed. Analysts warn that while the financial backing is robust, the real-world application and integration of these technologies into military operations require careful scrutiny to ensure they meet the demands of modern warfare. Meanwhile, in a separate yet noteworthy development, the Department of Defense recently restored an article on Jackie Robinson's military history to its website after it was briefly removed amid broader discussions about diversity and inclusion. The restoration highlights the ongoing tensions between historical recognition and current political narratives, particularly under the Trump administration. As the Pentagon navigates these multifaceted challenges, the outcomes of Hegseth's initiatives could set significant precedents for the future of defense procurement and technology integration. The balancing act between modernization, efficient spending, and security concerns will undoubtedly define the trajectory of U.S. defense policy in the coming years. Stakeholders within the defense sector are left to ponder how these changes will reshape the military landscape and whether they will ultimately enhance or hinder the effectiveness of U.S. military operations. As we look ahead, the focus will remain on how these reforms will be implemented and the broader implications for national security and military readiness. In an era marked by geopolitical upheaval and economic uncertainty, the discourse surrounding economic diplomacy has taken on a new urgency. The recent analysis from the Lowy Institute highlights how the policies and perspectives of the Trump administration are shaping not only American economic recovery but also international relations, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. As nations grapple with the implications of deglobalization, the contrasting economic trajectories of the United States and its global counterparts offer insights into the broader implications of current political dynamics. According to the International Monetary Fund (IMF), the United States has emerged as a surprising outlier in economic recovery, boasting growth rates that surpass pre-pandemic trends. The IMF's World Economic Outlook report indicates that while the U.S. economy has grown by 3.6% above its pre-pandemic trajectory, other major economies including China and the Eurozone continue to lag significantly. China's economy, for instance, is currently 5.3% below its trend, a stark contrast to the U.S. performance, which has been bolstered by reduced energy imports and increased labor productivity. This economic resilience comes at a time when the Trump administration's stance on international economic institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank is increasingly contentious. The administration's ideological roadmap, dubbed Project 2025, advocates for a U.S. withdrawal from these institutions, reflecting a broader skepticism towards multilateralism. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, however, recently acknowledged the enduring value of these institutions, stating, "America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, it is a call for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners." This nuanced approach suggests a potential shift in strategy that could mitigate some of the more destructive tendencies associated with the administration's economic policies. Meanwhile, the ramifications of Trump's approach are being felt across the Asia-Pacific region, where Australia's engagement with Southeast Asia has become increasingly crucial. A recent survey by the ISAS Yusof Ishak Institute indicates a slight uptick in favorable sentiments toward Australia among Southeast Asian opinion makers, positioning it as a viable counterweight to China's influence. This improvement coincides with Australia's diplomatic initiatives, including the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit, which have sought to enhance regional stability amid rising tensions. In Japan, the political landscape is equally dynamic as Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba defends his administration's economic negotiations with the U.S. amid criticism of perceived submissiveness to Trump. The opposition party has accused Ishiba's trade negotiator of engaging in tributary diplomacy during a recent meeting with the U.S. president, highlighting the delicate balance Japan must maintain in its diplomatic relations. As Ishiba emphasizes the importance of safeguarding free trade, the need for a more assertive Japanese stance in international affairs becomes increasingly apparent, particularly as protectionist sentiments gain traction globally. As the Trump administration prepares for a high-profile visit to the Middle East with plans to strengthen ties with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, the implications of these diplomatic efforts will likely extend beyond economic interests. The evolving narrative around economic diplomacy suggests a recalibration of alliances and trade relationships in response to shifting global power dynamics. In conclusion, as the world navigates the complexities of a post-pandemic economy and an increasingly fragmented geopolitical landscape, the outcomes of these diplomatic engagements will be pivotal. The United States under the Trump administration is at a crossroads where its economic policies may redefine not only its domestic landscape but also its role on the global stage. The coming months will undoubtedly reveal whether the current trajectory leads to a more collaborative international framework or further entrenches divisions among nations.